In this video, we're going to talk about the guides and the tape measure, of which there are two. We've got the tape measure here, and then we've got the protractor down below. And these are absolutely invaluable tools that you will use all the time. And I suggest and advise that you use them as often as possible, and that you also consider them relatively disposable and that you don't think of them as precious items, because what they're there for is they're there to help you measure, they're there to help you create guidelines that you can follow, grids, things like that. So this video will focus on that. So what I'm going to do first and foremost is just start with one guide. Without even a shape on the screen, I can start creating a footprint that I'm going to use to create a shape after the fact. So let's say I've gone out and I've measured something and I want to just create the outline using guides so I can see exactly how big it is before I commit to, the shape that I'm going to draw. So let's go ahead by clicking on the tape measure, and I have the tape measure acts just like the rectangle or the line tool or some of the other drawing tools, the move tool, in that you've got the axes that show up with it. So that's great because I want to be able to see what direction I'm going in. But as I start, I really only have the option of, aside from the fact that I've got a figure here, I really only have the option of starting with either the green, the red, or the blue axis to create a guide. So I'm just going to start with the green. So I'm going to click once using my left click, and I'm going to start dragging it in the direction of the red axis. And again, you'll see that, like some of the other tools, it's going to give me the length down here at the bottom, in the bottom corner. It's going to tell me exactly how far I'm dragging that out. So I can make this a hard measurement. I can type in 6 foot, enter, and I've got a 6 foot space from this guide to this guide. Now I can take this guide and I can click off of that and start creating other guides as well. So I can go up, I can go in the opposite direction. You'll notice it's just like the push-pull tool, and then it also is an operation that works in a parallel fashion. So I'm dragging this, I'm recreating this line, and I'm bringing it in a parallel direction along the red axis. So let's type, in this case, let's type 24 feet, enter. Now I can zoom out, and I'm going to use my mouse to do that. And I can see what I start orbiting around, and you'll see that these guides are creating, I've basically got like a 1-point perspective here, where the guides are all kind of vanishing into that 1 point in the background. So let me go ahead and make another guide. I'll start with, let me hit escape here. I'll start with the red axis and start drawing in this direction, and click. So I click once to start, click once to stop, and drag it back again, and this time I'll type something specific, 34 foot 7. I'm just kind of making that up at random. And now what I've done is I've created a boundary in which I can take my rectangle tool and click on that, and click once from this corner and click once to that corner without even having to think about it. And then I, of course, would go to my select tool, double click on this, right click to make it a group, and then I can double click on this again, and I can go to my push pull, click on that, and I can pull it down into space, and let's just say 6 feet, enter. So I've just created a box within that exact parameter that I wanted. Go to my select tool and click out in space. All right, so let's look at some of the other things I can do with guides. So that's kind of one of the simplest operations. I can also take my tape measure and I can just simply measure something. So I can go from point to point and see that I've got 24 feet. So this is a good informational tool for me. I can take my measuring tape and I can drag a guide inwards along that face and give myself, let's say, 5 feet, so that I know that I can now open this up by double-clicking on this shape, select my line tool, and follow along that face, clicking again, go back to my select tool, and I've got 2 different faces that I can now manipulate. So if I go to my push-pull, I can push-pull that face up, push-pull this face down, whatever it is that I want to do with that. Go ahead and click that to close it. All right. Another interesting thing, excuse me, another interesting thing that you can do with a guide is you can project a line. You can basically take your tape measure and project that line and continue it up into space and down into space infinitely. So to do that, you just click on your tape measure, and you go to that line, and you double click on it. And what I've now done is I've just created a guide along that line that you can see will just continue, if I really scroll out here, it'll just continue down along the blue axis forever. Do the same thing on this line. As I can do click, click from this point, and it's going to create a guideline that goes on and on into space. Another thing I can do is I can find the center of a shape, especially if it's something as simple as a rectangle. So if I go from point to point, it's going to give me a guide that runs along that line. And then if I go from point to point, it's going to give me a guide that runs along these 2 points, which is in turn going to give me the center point here. Right? And I've even just double clicked and I've given myself a little point in space. All right, the other thing you can do, among the many things, is you can create a point up in space off of a specific point. So if I'm clicking on this point here, the tape measure tool doesn't know whether I'm referring to this line, this vertical line. It doesn't know whether I'm referring to this horizontal or this horizontal line. And the reason for that is because they're all converging in one space. So it's going to be really confused if I start with a point like this. But if my intention is to find a point that's a specific height above this point, I can start by clicking on this point, dragging this up into space, and let's just make this 8 feet, enter. And what that's going to do is that's going to give me a point that floats above in space, perfectly on top of this point, and that's perfectly 8 feet above. So that can be pretty useful as well. Let's see. I think that just about covers what we can do with guides. So we're going to take a brief pause, and I'm going to go into the protractor tool.